The moment humans decided to stop wandering, hunting, and gathering whatever they could find to eat and settle down, they faced a new, unexpected challenge: to keep their surroundings clean. Before the days of civilization, humans could just do their business, make some mess, and then move on, leaving nature to take care of it. But nature's work is slow, so when humans built their permanent homes and called land their homes, they had to strap on their skin boots and had to take responsibility for the mess they made from there on. From Sumerians and Egyptians to Victorians and Versailles and further into the 20th century, let's find out what hygiene was like throughout history. The dawn of sanitation. Sumerians, one of the earliest settlers who founded the oldest known city of Eridu, were not that great at keeping things sanitary. In fact, Eridu grew to be one of the dirtiest cities known, as waste just piled up over generations. People would just chuck their waste out in the open, and there was no waste disposal system that they could come up with. Interestingly, Sumerians were well aware of how unhygienic and polluted surroundings invite diseases and ailments despite knowing nothing about germs. Still, they were clueless about how to combat the problem of growing filth mounds on their street. Maybe they should have also considered lowering the age of retirement. Interestingly, Sumerians were quite careful when it came to their personal hygiene. It has been discovered that Babylonians invented soap as early as 2800 BC. Remains of antique soap have been found in clay cylinders at many historic sites of Mesopotamia. Some of these soap containers also had labels inscribed on them. The most common writing on them is "fats boiled with ashes," which was the most common way of making soap for a long time in history. It is believed that Mesopotamians made the very first soap by cooking fatty acids from cows, sheep, and goats mixed with water, an alkaline substance, and wood ashes. In his book, Naturalis Historia, the Roman scholar Pliny the Elder also described soap as a pomade made of tallow that was derived from beef fat and ash. In a lot of our previous videos, we've often talked about how Egyptians were not only big fans of hygiene, but put a lot of stress on their appearance and self-care, and they also were obsessed with cosmetics. Being close to the Nile River, Egyptians loved to keep things sanitary, and they bathed on a regular. Evidence of their bathing routines can be found in Ebers Papyrus, a medical text scroll that was produced around 1500 BC. It had info on how one can use animal fat and vegetable oils in combination with salt to create soap. The soap created with instructions from Ebers Papyrus was not only used for washing and bathing, but was also considered beneficial for treating skin conditions. Egyptians were also perhaps the earliest civilization to come up with the idea of indoor washrooms. But they forgot an important detail: running water. They had toilets and bathing areas built inside houses, but they also had to carry water from the Nile River to use for these indoor toilets. Obviously, only the rich Egyptians were able to afford to have a servant that would do the job to bring water from the river for them. This was the invention of the job water carriers, which remained a common job in the Middle Ages, as well as in the early modern ages until plumbing became a common thing all around the world. To this day, people are forced to carry water into their homes in some remote areas of the world. Lack of running water was a huge problem back in Egypt too, so you can imagine how bad these washrooms must have smelled after somebody would do their business. And to make it worse, like Sumerians, they had to get rid of this waste by throwing it out in the open. We can only imagine how bad it would be for someone who would be roaming in the city of Memphis, marveling at the colorful and lavish architecture of the city, unable to tilt their neck down in fear of missing some beautiful sight, and then, splat, they stepped in some rich Egyptian's doo-doo. Ugh, gross. The communal dumps or irrigation canals caused vermin and diseases to grow and spread in both Sumerian civilization and the Egyptian civilization. This is why the plague was such a common occurrence in older civilizations and played a big part in defining their gods and stories in their mythologies. Let the water flow. However, other early civilizations found bringing water to them easier instead of the other way around. You see, people in the Indian subcontinent and on the island of Crete understood the real meaning of the saying, "You can bring a horse to water." While the early Mediterranean civilization suffered due to a lack of knowledge about plumbing, the Bronze Age of civilization of the ancient Indus Valley was prominent in hydraulic engineering. Indus Valley civilization residents built their houses with dried mud bricks, or clay bricks, using mud as cement. They also built public baths and private baths in the urban areas, and for such baths to function properly, they needed a sewage system. To accomplish that, they built underground drains. Their secret to getting rid of the filth was highly advanced architecture for their time. These drains were built with precisely laid bricks, which constituted a sophisticated water management that was connected with multiple reservoirs. Now, this drainage system wasn't only connected with public establishments, but it also allowed connecting houses through smaller drains that would dump the waste into wider public drains. And they accomplished all of this in 1500 BC. If that fact doesn't blow your mind, consider this. Double-story and multiple-story houses have been found in Mohenjo-Daro, and the Indus Valley people were equipped with the knowledge to not only build enclosed terracotta pipes and open chutes to empty water bathrooms at higher stories, but they also had ways to carry water up there. The cities of Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, and the recently discovered Rakhigarh offer the earliest evidence of urban sanitation. In comparison, the West was lacking so much when it came to plumbing that when a flush was first used in London, Queen Victoria jumped from the toilet seat and ran away after hearing the roar of the flush dumping water. She vowed to never use a modern toilet again. The urban plan of the Indus Valley civilization involved building wells in the commune areas of the residential blocks to supply water. They had a room set aside for bathing and a toilet with wastewater directed towards covered drains that lined up with the major streets. Devices such as shadoofs and sakias were used to lift water to ground level. Ruins like Mohenjo-Daro in Pakistan and Dalavriya in Gujarat, India, had settlements with some of the ancient world's most sophisticated sewage systems. They included drainage channels, rainwater harvesting, and street ducts. Step wells have been used in the Indian subcontinent for ages. Many courtyard houses had both a washing platform, and they would also build a dedicated toilet and waste-disposing hole with a clay vessel placed atop it that would be tilted to drop water into the hole and flush the waste towards the drain. However, to achieve this, they had to be in close proximity to water bodies, and that brought their end too, since nobody knows what ended the Indus civilization, but a catastrophic flood is considered the most plausible cause. Minoans of Crete Island took everything Indus Valley people invented and then they took it a step further. They built multi-story complexes, which for ease archaeologists refer to as palaces. Palaces were actually distribution centers for large quantities of goods like olive oil and wine and grains. The architecture of these palaces was extraordinary and well ahead of its time. These palaces had colonnaded courtyards, sliding doors, and external staircases. The monumental stone buildings were braced with wood beams. It was during the early Bronze Age, somewhere between 3500 BC to 2100 BC, that Minoans developed a systematic evolution of water management. The palace MINOS of the city of KNOSSOS had the most elaborate terracotta pipe water management that is known to us now. It wasn't just a drainage system like the Indus Valley. The water technologies at the island of Crete included running water within the palaces and other settlements, drainage systems, piping systems, rainwater harvesting, and other technologies. Terracotta pipes served a variety of functions for the Minoans. They could convey either wastewater, fresh water from local springs, or stormwater collected from roofs. Then they carried this water to reservoir systems, palaces, sewage and drainage systems, or public water supply networks, such as public fountains or an open space from a spring, as was the case in the town of Zakro. A setup from Myrtos-Pyrgos utilized a terracotta pipe of rectangular shape to supply the nearby cistern system with rainwater collected from roofs. These pipes were also used in aqueducts. Minoan aqueducts were basically of two kinds: the natural gravity flow system that can be found in MALIA and TYLISSOS, and the closed pressurized pipe system used in other cities. The closed-type water distribution in Minoan Crete was obviously evident from the use of terracotta pipes that were found at the palaces of KNOSSOS and TYLISSOS. But later more were discovered at the palaces of Phistos and Palekustro, Gornia, Leucastos, and Zakro. Stones and sticks. From the late Bronze Age to Hellenistic times, the West learned the importance of baths. The ancient Greeks understood how regular bathing correlates with better health, but before they made that connection, they had baths that were basically a quick dip into a tub of ice-cold water. The people of Laconica, near Sparta, were the first to invent hot air baths. Laconica baths warmed with hot coals or rocks soon became a thing of luxury among Greek nobility. Over time, this inspired them to build large public bathhouses in almost every city. But when it comes to the toilets, somehow Greece took a step, or should we say multiple steps back from what the Minoans had achieved a few hundred years ago. Instead of having running water in their homes, Hellenistic Greece came up with a different solution to wipe their behinds that perhaps could be considered the reason why most of the world uses toilet paper today instead of bidets. Now, toilet paper feels nicer on the rear, but it wasn't invented during the times of Greeks, and using papyrus in that fashion may have angered the Egyptians. So ancient Greeks chose the next best option: pebbles. Okay, obviously I'm being sarcastic, but how does the rough, sharp-edged, and coarse texture of tiny rocks seem like a good choice for these Greeks who created philosophy? Now, to add to that, ancient Greek restroom equipment were nothing more than bench seats with a hole. In public restrooms, people sat right next to each other with no walls or dividers. Eventually, even middle-class homes had their own restrooms and flushing toilets, but at least the Greeks had not forgotten how to build a drainage system, as the Minoans did back in the day. In our video about what beauty was like in ancient Greece, we talked about how pale skin and blonde hair were all the rage. Funny how people travel to Greece these days to get a tan. So naturally, Greeks had a sun-kissed body, but they wanted a more North European look. To achieve that, they would apply a foundation. In the beginning, around 1000 BC, they would just lace themselves with chalk. You heard that right. What can be more pale than white powdered chalk? No matter how much, that was bad for their respiratory system. The Greeks were so obsessed about looking like a ghost that they later replaced chalk with more toxic lead powder in 200 BC. For oral hygiene, Greeks chewed mastic, a plant resin derived from the mastic tree, to keep their breath fresh and maintain teeth cleanliness. The Greeks also used twigs as toothpicks and brushes to promote oral hygiene. The word hygiene also comes from the Greek god Ygieia, who was the daughter of the god of medicine, Asclepius. She was the goddess of health, and Greek physicians dedicated entire schools to the art of health. Romans also paid a lot of importance to oral hygiene, so much so that they were willing to put anything in their mouth to keep it clean and healthy. Now, in the present day, I don't think anybody would put urine in their mouths, but Romans were fascinated by its composition. Urine contains a wide array of important minerals and chemicals such as phosphorus and potassium. Even though Romans had no idea about these two minerals, they somehow figured out that whatever was in the urine would help to make their teeth whiter and prevent decay. Now, who was the first person to try that and keep trying it until they discovered the benefits of it? And it wasn't just human urine they were using, but animals too. They not only used it as a mouthwash, but it was also the main ingredient of their toothpaste. Romans also ditched the idea of using pebbles like the Greeks and came up with something softer and more sophisticated: a sponge. Anna Olga Kozlovsky-Ostro, an anthropologist at Brandeis University, considers herself the official queen of latrines because she spent a good part of her career learning about ancient Roman gutters. Now, the word latrine, or latrina in Latin, was used to describe a private toilet in someone's home, usually constructed over a cesspit. Public toilets were called forica. They were often attached to public baths whose water was used to flush down the filth. Like Greeks, Romans too had no problem with sitting with others in close quarters. The toga made it easy to maintain privacy in such a scenario than pulling the pants down. There's also the question of stink, but it seems Romans had fewer inhibitions than people today. Once done with their dumps, the sponge came into the picture, but get this, nobody had a private sponge. They were as communal as playgrounds. These sea sponges used for cleaning Roman behinds were attached to a stick, and the gutter supplied clean flowing water to dip the sponges in. The sponge stick was called a tersorium, which literally meant a wiping thing. But today, people like to call it the poop stick. Because of the communal nature of tersorium, shared butt wiping meant shared diseases too. If one of the forica visitors had intestinal worms, that meant all the others would carry them home for sure. Additionally, the lack of good light and cramped spaces meant people would often miss the hole. Forica were not well maintained either, so walking into a public toilet in ancient Rome was no better than walking into a toilet at a rave club. Now, it's hard to say if Romans washed their hands after doing their business or not. Maybe they dipped their fingers into an amphora by the door. Maybe they didn't. There is a possibility that in some parts of the empire they did, and in some parts they did not. Egyptians, for one, were very responsible for it because of living in a drier climate. They always kept their hands clean. Ooh, some nice filth.
Big King, go on. He hasn't got all over him.
When it comes to hygiene, no era has got a bad rep like the Middle Ages. Every piece of media loves to portray medieval-age peasants covered in filth and grime. Now, the blame for this stereotype goes to Queen Isabella of Castile. She supposedly boasted that she had bathed only twice in her life, on the day she was born and on the day she married Ferdinand of Aragon. Whew. The myth about the Middle Ages people not bathing comes from the times of the Black Death, when medieval doctors cautioned people against bathing, because they felt that by bathing in hot water, bodies would be exposed to diseases as pores would open. Also, they didn't want people congregated in bathhouses during the spread of sickness. The reason behind it was that public baths often reuse water for multiple people. However, they were also aware that bathing would help in curing sickness, and they prescribed it for conditions ranging from bladder stones to melancholy. It is believed that rich people mostly bathed on a regular and actually spent a lot of money to make bathing a luxury experience. I know you're thinking of Geralt of Rivia in a bathtub now. Stop it! King John, for example, traveled with a bathtub and had a bathman under his employment, and he liked to take about 10 baths every 6 months. Edward III installed new taps for his Westminster bath chamber, which gave him access to both hot and cold running water. Medieval people were also aware of the importance of good dental hygiene. They were advised to rinse their teeth with water when waking up to wash off any mucus that had built up overnight. Unlike the Roman times, urine was no longer the choice of oral hygiene. It was now the washing detergent for clothes. However, getting rid of waste was once again a hassle in the Middle Ages too. Somehow toilets lost their appeal and chamber pots became all the rage. Also, it was decided that emptying these chamber pots would be a woman's job, and they would throw the contents over a balcony or out of a window while screaming a warning to avoid ruining somebody else's morning. This practice was also used later in the Palace of Versailles, a palace built so far from any water settlement that they had no choice but to decorate the gardens of the beautiful palace with heaps of excrement. Even if one was careful enough to not let a chamber pot rain on them or step into the filth, the disgusting stink was still everywhere. Men and women would wear small bags around their noses to keep the stench away, and they'd fill these bags with flowers and other fragrances that would help dampen the smell. We can all be thankful to have Febreze nowadays. However, for men, the profession of poop was a matter of career advancement. If one could let go of their integrity, the groom of the king's stool was the most degrading but also rewarding job of medieval times. The position was first created by Henry VIII, who was too overweight to reach around, and it became a highly regarded position. Sir William Compton, Henry's groom of the king's stool, became a close friend and confidant of the king. It was a crappy job to wipe the rear of another man, but it also granted you knighthood for having the bravery to do so. And not just anyone could become the groom of the stool. To get this prize gig, one needed a serious connection. There was no backdooring this opportunity. The problem of waste management was so bad that by the time of Henry VIII, royals would move all over the year between their multiple palaces so that their last residence could be cleared out of all the stench, wasted food, heaps of excrement, and infestation of all sorts of vermin. For the lower class, life with vermin and diseases was quite normal. To deal with vermin, they would line their floor with hay, but that just invited insects in to make their home. The filthiest palaces. The filth at the Grand Golden Palace of Versailles was as much a part of it as the sun symbol of the royal dynasty. The population at the property was always somewhere between 1,000 to 5,000, and the royal staff needed almost a small army to keep it clean with very little help. Managing such a palace was so bad that the noble occupants were asked to take care of their own apartments. Meanwhile, the halls and hallways of Versailles also became toilets for the residents as there were so few washrooms for so many people. The chamber pots were usually filled to the brim most of the time and would leak into the walls of lower floors through ceilings. Women would have to pull down a section of their clothing to pee where they stood, while some men urinated off the balustrade in the middle of the royal chapel. Then, of course, there was the matter of bathing. Thanks to some healers of the 15th and 16th centuries, bathing had become a controversial topic in Europe, with them theorizing that bathing attracts diseases. That reduced the frequency of bathing in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries to less than a week in Europe, but that doesn't necessarily mean people were filthy back then. By their own standards, they were relatively clean. Most of them were, at least. When getting out of bed, washing one's hands and face was standard, and a quick wash of the rest of the body followed in the form of rubbing. Some use a wet cloth for this, some preferred to be rubbed down with perfumes, and others used what was considered to be the safest, alcohol. Louis XIV, in particular, was rubbed down with clothes soaked in alcohol every day. However, dental hygiene took the biggest hit during these centuries as people of Versailles in Victorian times invented processed sugar, and the clock officially chimed 2:30. Get it? Tooth-hurdy? I'm just reading what they type here, man. Dental hygiene plummeted as the art of confectionery evolved rapidly until the science of modern dentistry came along. This was also the period when France became the country of pleasant odors and perfumes. They developed new methods of perfuming people and places. Now, some worked and some, well, they didn't work. Often they would infuse strong essential oils into fountains and other everyday objects to help clear the stench. The smelling box was also another French product that made France the pioneer of the perfuming industry. It was a box holding fabric soaked in liquid fragrances. The most revolutionary development in modern history's hygiene came with running water in the 19th century. Within a few decades, fresh water was accessible to many, and an organized trash disposal system was shaping up. This helped bathing and hygiene become normalized again. Things started turning around in America too as they began installing sewers and expanding access to water as well. Philadelphia saw the first commercial deodorant being launched in 1888, and since then we have never looked back as the modern market is filled with pharmaceuticals and cosmetics that make us cleaner than ever. Hope you enjoyed the entire history of hygiene throughout history. Please share the video and don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching Nutty History.